Now we'll show you the Spring Cloud connector integration that we've added with libraries for ECS. It's certainly possible to provision things manually through the ECS, so I'll show you that as an example first. Let me check out my user that we created. I created a demo user. I'll go take a look at that user real quickly. I'm just going to copy the password out. We'll take a look at the settings real quick. Looks good. Okay. Now let me take a look at my bucket, make sure I've created that all right. I've got my demo bucket. I can take a look at the settings that I've set. Keep in mind that when you use it manually, you kind of have to know the settings that you're using. And let me double check my ACLs, make sure I have the permissions that I need for my demo user. And I do. I've got full control of the bucket. So as we mentioned in the previous video, we need to configure our application in order to use that. So I can see the properties here that I'm injecting into my app. And in order to really use those, I'm going to have a properties class. It's a piece in Spring that loads the configuration file into a class for me. And I'm going to load those properties into my S3 connector class. And the connector is going to build an AWS SDK client to connect to my object storage bucket. And then using that connector class that I've got that includes my bucket and my actual SDK client, I can do all of the necessary things to work with my object data. I can list, I can delete, I can upload new documents, and I'll be able to access this from my web application. So I'm just going to start my application here in the IDE. It's a Spring Boot application, so it's pretty easy to start. It's up and running on port 8080. I'll flip over to my web browser and I'll see that it's here running. So now let's see how I can do this in Cloud Foundry with Spring Cloud. So let me just double check and make sure that I'm logged into the right environment. Cool. Now I'll push my application up to Cloud Foundry. I'm going to pass it a no start because it doesn't have its bucket yet and it would just crash without it. I'll flip over to my Apps Manager console. And I'll go ahead and provision a bucket right through the marketplace. So I'll use the same name here, and this time I'll bind it to my application. So this effectively creates my bucket and creates the ACLs on my bucket that my application needs to access it. And I don't really need to know anything about the ECS in order to do that. It's kind of been taken care of for me by the catalog. I'll go ahead and start my app. I'll give it a second to start. While it starts, we can look and see what I can do with Spring Cloud. So I don't need a configuration class. All I need to do is to create a connector bean, which is given to me by the Spring Cloud library, and all of those same functions still work. So that's all the code that I needed. And make sure that we're started here. And it looks like we are. So I'll browse to my app. And let's test it out. Make sure I can place a file on there. Let's pick one. There we go. I can upload my file. I can upload it, I can list it, I can view it straight from the bucket.